So, Home and Away, Recollections of a Travelling Photographer. And I'm going to start with a picture of a Halliburton suitcase, much battered. It's actually the third one. I had one stolen in New York, and I had one stolen on a train back from York. And on both occasions, the insurance company paid out in full, which is just as well, because they're about 700 quid, just for a suitcase, which is why the Halliburton company, who were involved in the Gulf of Mexico disaster, didn't want to pay out. So BP carried the can entirely. Anyway, that's an aside. So here we are. This is everybody's dream of what being a travel photographer really involves. It's swinging in a hammock in the Maldive Islands, and it's also the reason why so many people over the course of my working life have offered to carry my camera bag. In fact, being an itinerant snapper involved okay. And despite that, we all loved it. We couldn't get enough of it. We were a very fortunate generation. But before we spin off around the world and look at some of my pictures, I want to talk about three people who made a dramatic difference to my life. The first is Eric Hoskins, and I wrote to him when I was 11. He'd had a picture published in the Times of the first avocet ever to nest in this country for 150 years, and that took place at the RSPB Reserve in Havergate Island in Suffolk. And I wrote to him as an 11-year-old, and he sent me a print and a really incredibly kind letter. And that decided me that I really wanted to be a photographer, because they were obviously very nice people. So on his 70th birthday, I was then 30 maybe, I don't know, I persuaded the Telegraph magazine, for whom I did a lot of work, to do a feature about him so that I could meet him. That was my sole reason in proposing the story. So I met him and I spent a day with him, and actually several days, and ended up photographing him in his darkroom, which was a black magician's hole, really. It was incredible. There's stuff in the background there that hasn't been made for 40 years. Now, the next person, of course, was E4 Thomas, and anyone who was here last year or has been keeping up with things knows that he and Joy Thomas ran the Guildford School of Photography when I was there, and he made an enormous difference to my life, because I went to see the Polytechnic in London, and they looked at my work, and I looked at their notice board, which said, you can't do this, can't do that, don't be late, be on time, you know, don't wipe your boots and everything. I thought, I don't want to go to the Polytechnic anyway. So I went to Guildford instead, and E4 looked at my picture and said, come in, boy. And then, of course, most important of all was Bob Gilker, who was the director of photography at the National Geographic, and who gave me my first break in 1966 that led on to 25 amazing years shooting for the National Geographic, for the books and the magazine, and also travel magazine. And that's Bob on his retirement. And I should tell you a brief story about him. He had over the door into his office on the 6th floor of the building, he had a sampler, an embroidered sampler, as you might see in an antique shop or whatever, and it said, please wipe your knees before entering. Now, I also think of myself as a Kodachrome kid, because our lifetimes virtually overlapped. I was born in 1938, 3 years after that legendary film was launched by Kodak, and the last roll was shot and processed in 2010, around the time that I did my last commercial assignment. So we overlap very much, and this, I probably shot more Kodachrome than anything else, although the first part of my career was in black and white, and the latter part of my career was on Fuji, and the penultimate bit of my career was, of course, digital. But I did shoot thousands of rolls of Kodachrome. And this is the first of them. It's gone, sorry. That's my first roll of Kodachrome, shot in 1953. You notice it had a red border then. It's very, very much smarter than it became. Later on it had blue and then it had yellow. So here are some early pictures. I fell in love with Cornwall very early on in my life. We had family connections down there. We used to go down for holidays, and I really fell in love with it. And I shot lots of pictures down there, almost before I was a student, and certainly when I was a student, and for many years afterwards. We took a little boat out from St Mary's and Scilly's to go and visit the Bishop Rock Lighthouse. And this was a lovely calm day, and we delivered the mail. It's not any longer a manned lighthouse. It's about 12 miles off the Scilly's. And I took several frames and I counted the number of steps, the rungs that were hidden by the waves on this perfectly calm day. And there were 12 steps hidden in one frame and none hidden in the next. So it was not an absolutely flat day. The Atlantic swell was still about 15 foot, but very gentle. So St Michael's Mount has always held a magical fascination for me, and I've photographed it many times. On this particular occasion, I was staying in a hotel in Penzance that overlooked the harbour, and I woke up very early in the morning. The sun came in and I woke up, because I think photographers wake up when the sun comes in, whatever time of year it is, unfortunately. And I leapt out of bed in my pyjamas and I grabbed a tripod and a camera and a camera bag, and I ran all over the place looking for the perfect viewpoint, which happened to be in somebody's private garden. So there I was with a tripod and a camera bag and pyjamas, sprinting around their garden, saying, "Stop, stop, don't take the boat round so quickly. For God's sake, stop." And at that time there were millions of small dairy farmers in West Penwith, which is where we go on holiday, and that was typical of the evening milking, walking the cows home. That time there were also lots of working tin mines, 3 or 4 working tin mines, and this was in Gŵyl, which was still working. I went down Gŵyl mine on a story for the Telegraph, and my God, it was uncomfortable. It's just like a sauna. It's hotter than a sauna and soaking wet. And I went down with a journalist who, at the height of my desperation, produced from his top pocket of his boiler suit, which we'd been obliged to wear, he produced an immaculately laundered white handkerchief with which to wipe my lens, which was running with moisture. I was very grateful to him.